Sometimes in a world of comics, there are going to be those superheroes who transcend whatever the character was trying to do. These superheroes tend to serve the purpose as mantles, whether they be symbols of hope, or they represent a certain theme or idea that can be explored by more than one person. In this video, I'm going to be going over my top 10 best superhero mantles across both Marvel and DC Comics. If you haven't yet already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and to leave a comment down below. Was there any mantles that I have missed? Do you agree or disagree with my rankings? I would love to see your list down below. But otherwise, let's go ahead and get into my number 10. Going into my number 10, I've got Black Panther. So for me, when it comes to the mantle of Black Panther, whatever I look for in a superhero as far as a mantle is what does the symbol mean in the greater scheme of the themes and the stories that it's trying to tell? Does it have a rich history? Do the people who are trying to take up the mantle reinterpret that history and the message of what it means to be that mantle into their own way? And how unique is it? Well, with Black Panther, as we obviously know, tragically Chadwick Boseman passed away, and that based on the trailers for Wakanda Forever, it seems pretty obvious that Shuri is going to be taking over the role as Black Panther. Inside the comics, there is thousands of years of history of being a Black Panther and how it's been constantly passed on from generation to generation inside of Wakanda. And part of the reason that it makes my number 10 spot is the fact that it does have that super rich history of the thousands of years and the different periods in which Black Panther exists. It's definitely an up, but the problem that I have with measuring Black Panther as a mantle, not as a character, but simply as a mantle, is that there's only been two people who've had the mantle who've kind of tried to do something with it. Obviously, T'Challa is the most known Black Panther, and Shuri has also been Black Panther for a period. But the history as far as like bringing the mantle to life in their new ways, for me, I just don't see that ranking any higher on this list. And for my number 9, I've got Batman. So, we obviously all know that Bruce Wayne is the most infamous Batman. He's the most popular, one that's been shown in all medias and cultures and stuff. But in all actuality, there's been 3 notable people who've held the mantle of Batman. 4 untechnically, but we've got Bruce Wayne. In the Batman Beyond series, we have Terry McGinnis. There was a period of time in which Dick Grayson held the mantle of Batman. And in the Battle of the Cowl storyline, Jean-Paul Valley, aka who would become Azrael, held the mantle of Batman at one point. And while there's been some notable names that held the mantle of Batman, the problem with Batman as a mantle is the opposite of what has it for Black Panther. And that is, there's been notable names and they've twisted the mantle into their own ways in the way that they operate as heroes. Sometimes anti-heroes if you ask Jean Paul, but what does it mean to be Batman? If I'm to be Batman, what is Batman supposed to be a symbol of? Not just to Bruce Wayne, but that transcends beyond Bruce Wayne, to where it could be a message that's passed down from when Bruce hangs up the cowl and it goes to Terry, or it goes to Jean Paul, or it goes to Dick Grayson. And aside from Batman Beyond as a show, there really hasn't been a rich enough exploration of what it means to be Batman. Of course, the characters are all very different and very unique, which is very nice. But as far as upholding and what it means to be Batman, and the understanding behind the symbol that is Batman, I think it's just kind of been either shuffled or kind of lost. I'm honestly not sure. Let me know your guys' thoughts about that one. And for my number 8, I've got Superman. So, Clark Kent, or Kal-El, whichever version that you want to go with, is the symbol of hope. The symbol that he wears on his chest, the Kryptonian crest for the House of El, is meant to be symbolizing hope wherever he goes. And Clark Kent does a fantastic job of embodying that within his own means of being a hero. He's the symbol of hope inside of DC Comics, much in the same regard as Captain America is for the realm of Marvel Comics. However, rather than just being called Superman, I think anyone who's born the crest of the House of L, more specifically, is their own way of reinventing what it means to be a symbol of hope. I think that Supergirl does a good job with what she does. Calvin Ellis on an alternate Earth does a good job with his. You've got Steel, who also bears the Kryptonian House of L. So it's not so much as being called Superman that ranks him up higher than Batman, but the fact that they are using this symbol and are finding their own ways to interpret what it means to be a symbol of hope in their own struggles and as characters, and as far as the Superman family is concerned, it's definitely got that elements going for it, which I definitely make it better than both Black Panther as a mantle and better than Batman as a mantle that can be passed on, because it's a clear, broad enough message that has enough open ends to where you can wiggle whatever story you want out of it, as long as you hit the key points of what it means to bear the Superman logo. So, Superman, more specifically, the House of L, and what it means to be a symbol of hope, ranks as my number 8. So, now going on to my number 7, I've got the Flash. So, when it comes to the Flash, I think the fact that the longevity of the Flash and who has been a Flash really elevates the Flash's ranking on my list. Because the Flash has been around since the 1940s, in all actuality. Jay Garrick was the first Flash, and then of course we get notable Flash members like we get Barry Allen, we get Bart Allen, we get Wally West, we get all these various speedsters, but the problem that I have with the Flash as a symbol, more specifically, is the fact that there's not a lot of questions in regards to what does it mean to be a Flash? Is it that you are fast? Is it that you are a good hero? What is the standard that needs to be met, or what is the ideal message behind being a Flash, to where if you or me decided that we wanted to become the Flash because we gained super speed, what standard are we trying to uphold and to kind of carry on and move forward that the previous Flashes before us already set the stage work for? And like I said, the Flash doesn't have a history problem, but I think it's the message behind what it means to carry the lightning bolt on your chest, to be a bearer of the Speed Force. Is there any messages, themes, or anything that we can take into our own lives and kind of spin and make new stories out of? Because I feel that with the Flash, aside from wearing the red and yellow, there's not really anything significant in that department. So that's why I have the Flash here on my. At my true number 6, I've got Ghost Rider. Now, unlike the Flash and like any of the previous mantles lists, I think that the mantle of Ghost Rider has the very opposite problem of any of those. I think that Ghost Rider has an incredibly rich history that dates back centuries, as we can see in this picture. We've seen Ghost Riders who are Native Americans, some were Russians, cowboys. There's a huge amount of history as far as the mantle of Ghost Rider, because being a spirit of vengeance can happen to anybody. It can happen to as many people or as little people as possible. But I think the most notable part of the fact of what makes Ghost Rider work as a mantle, hero, anti-hero, or otherwise, is its two notable spirits of vengeance in both Johnny Blaze and Robbie Reyes. So, obviously, everyone is very familiar with Johnny Blaze and how he essentially has become the king of hell. He's the most popular, he has the motorcycle, that's his whole thing. Robbie Reyes is a bit more new generation when it comes to being a Ghost Rider. He drives a Mustang, he has a Hispanic heritage, and he is being a spirit of vengeance for a very different reason than Johnny Blaze is. However, they're still taking up being a spirit of vengeance, controlling their desires to seek out vengeance on other people, and they share that common ground that regardless of who is the Ghost Rider at the time, they still are upholding this idea of being a spirit of vengeance and what it means to cast vengeance, and maybe the gray areas of morality and things of that nature, which is why I think that Ghost Rider, as cool as he is for being a flaming guy, he's also really good at being a mantle and can be something that could be passed on to other characters, and you can experiment and spin the story in a multitude of different ways, which is why I have Ghost Rider ranked my number 5. I've got the Green Lanterns, more specifically, Green Lantern of Earth. So, obviously, the Green Lantern Corps as a whole, and in fact, all the lanterns as a whole, all symbolize a different emotion and have qualification based on that emotion on the emotion spectrum. As we know, the Green Lanterns are a symbol of willpower and your ability to discipline yourself and to not give up and that sort of thing. It's very simple in concept, and as far as like what the rings can do and their powers, it's very simple. But I think that it's got such a rich history with what it's done with its characters. So if you're tracing the Green Lantern mantle as a whole, all the way to the beginning, obviously we have the guy in the very middle, Alan Scott, who was the very first Green Lantern who served on the Justice Society of America, which predated Justice League of America that we know today. And he received his ring and was able to set a precedence for humans specifically, not the Green Lanterns as a whole, because the Green Lantern Corps is older than Alan Scott, so there's that. But there's a precedence of having this willpower. It's other members that we know of, about Guy Gardner and how he's just this sleazy little Green Lantern, but he has an iron will, which is why he's been selected as a Green Lantern. We have Green Lanterns like Hal Jordan, who are so powerful and have been put through the ringer so much and really tested his ideals as a Green Lantern that he's strong enough to create his own ring out of sheer willpower. It's honestly insane. I think that's probably the biggest amount of character development that Hal Jordan was able to get inside of the realms of being a mantle and of being Green Lantern. John Stewart has a completely different approach. Whereas with Hal Jordan, who was a pilot, and he has all these arrogance issues and stuff, John Stewart grew up in the army. He was raised to be a soldier, so his militaristic ideals and the way that he is using his militaristic ideals in bringing up being a Green Lantern and to using it, it's even in his constructs and the way that he goes about being a Green Lantern. He uses a lot of weapons, a lot of machinery, a lot of tactics and planning and orders and chain of command. That's his whole structure as a lantern, is he's this militaristic force because that's what he was raised in. And honestly, seeing that spin on it to where that is what becomes of what makes him a Green Lantern is honestly really great. And then we get the guy above him. We got Kyle Rayner as well. Kyle Rayner is a very different character from Hal Jordan, and he's a very different character from Alan Scott or any of the other Green Lanterns that came before him, because he eventually, even though he's the least popular sometimes out of the lanterns, he eventually transcends and becomes a White Lantern himself. Which, for those of you who don't know, a White Lantern is a symbol of life. It has the ability to access any range of emotions and can cast any emotions of any lantern color that exists, with the only exception being its polar opposite, the Black Lanterns, which represent death. But otherwise, they can access Blue Lantern powers and charge up Green Lanterns and neutralize Red Lanterns. They could use avarice if they wanted to against Larfleeze. They are supremely powerful and are supreme above everything else except for its counterpart. And because Kyle Rayner has transcended himself to that point, I think it shows just his willpower alone. Of course, we have people like beside Kyle Rayner, like Abin Sur, who is considered the most pure-hearted Green Lantern that exists. Former Green Lantern Sinestro, who eventually formed his own Sinestro Corps, based on the emotional spectrum of fear. And yeah, I think that the Green Lanterns are a great militaristic force, a police force across the space, that all take on this idea of willpower in their own very different ways based on the various circumstances that the users of the rings are placed in. So, this is where I have Green Lantern.
Right.
At my number 4, I've got Iron Fist. Now, for those of you who don't know, did you guys know that Danny Rand is actually the 66th Iron Fist that ever existed in Marvel continuity? Well, now the next question becomes, what happened to the other 65 that came before? Well, I actually did a lot of research, and probably my biggest appeal with Iron Fist is his lore. The lore behind Kunlun and all of the various Iron Fists of different time periods, the various techniques that they were all able to learn, and how it is all shared in the Book of the Iron Fist. And more importantly, it's the fact that these immortal weapons are champions of their specific capital city. Because in the infamous Capital Cities of Heaven storyline, we learn that there are multiple immortal weapons, each with their own lineage and techniques in the way that they operate. So the that is the biggest reason that I think Iron Fist has such a great way to being a mantle, because it's got such a rich history that predates almost everything on this list. And the fact that each one's, for example, we've got characters like Orson Randall, who uses guns inside of his chi in the way that chi is manipulated, and they all operate as different honorable warriors in different time periods. And I think that that history that compounds onto the next user, that compacts onto the next user, and the next champion of Kunlun, honestly is what makes the Iron Fist mantle as great and as cool as it can possibly be. I think that the Netflix show gets a lot of hate. I personally am not a fan of it either. But I think it's because the fact that Iron Fist is grounded just like the rest of the shows that were previously belonging to Netflix. What I think Iron Fist should have done, and part of the reason that I think the mantle is so cool, is that it should have played with the mystical areas that Iron Fist explores. It should have played into the lineage that was Iron Fist. It should have played into what it meant to be an immortal weapon, or what the capital cities of heaven are, and each of the individual champions and immortal weapons, and hosting a tournament that they have every so often. And all of this interweaves and honestly just propels Iron Fist as a character, which is why I have him at number 4. At my number 3, easily without a question or a doubt in my mind, Spider-Man. So for me, Spider-Man has always been, regardless of who it is under the mask, and the fact that he does wear a mask and it could be anybody, is what makes this mantle work. Spider-Man, to me, has always been a hero who's just like you and me, who goes through everyday problems, who has day to day things that he goes through that we can relate to, and he's the most human of all superheroes. And the fact that he was even a teenager made it even more intricate and more unique with Peter Parker specifically. But now we've got this whole Spider Verse and this whole mythos around the multiverse that makes the Spider Man mantle even richer than it already is. So, of course, we have Peter Parker, who's the most popular, the most well known, the only one that's been adapted live action and has so many games and is Marvel's highest selling property, period. And then we got characters like Miles Morales, who, after things like Into the Spider Verse and after his own game, have kind of propelled him as a Spider Man. Because to me, his dynamics, his relationship are completely changed. And I think it's also cool to the fact that I'm mixed and Miles Morales is mixed as well. He's half black and half Hispanic. I think that's just really cool. It's a different dynamic that plays into the world where sometimes maybe Miles Morales could talk about race, or the fact that his dynamic with his uncle is completely different from Peter's to Ben's, or the fact that all the Spider-Men have dealt with loss and have their own relatable problems in their own alternate universes. but are still trying to do good and still trying to persevere. And the fact that they all share these same qualities that makes a Spider-Man just make it even more meta than what it appears. So Spider-Man as an ideal transcends even the current universe that he lives in. And honestly, he is the reason that he is ranked where he is. At my number 2, simply put, it's Captain America. I'm sorry, guys. As tough of it as it was for me to rank and choose between whether I wanted Spider-Man to be my number 2 or Captain America to be my number 2, he has to go up here because he is the symbol of hope like Superman, but his ideals transcend completely what it means to be Captain America. Because Captain America, Steve Rogers, as we know, his ideals have more so been with American ideals in giving people choice, in giving everyone fairness, and giving everyone justice as a whole. When we've got Sam Wilson, especially now in the MCU, as the current Captain America, Falcon and the Winter Soldier presented a touch on racism, which I think was very different for the direction of the show. And it provided a different source of what it means to be an American. But it doesn't necessarily have to be American, as patriotic as it might sound. Because even though Captain America as a mantle started off, heck, this even happened with Marvel Comics, as a superhero of hope during the darkest times in American history with World War II going on, it transcended as into a fact of taking the best of a nation's qualities and putting it inside of a character. Captain America believes in freedom of speech, free choice, in accepting everyone regardless of any disagreements or anything like that. And I think it just reflects the modern world in a completely different way. And with characters like Red Guardian or Captain Britain, who do the very same thing with Captain America, except they do it for their own countries. Red Guardian obviously is Russian, and he represents the best of Russia's qualities. So the fact that these are symbols of countries and their best ideals, and the fact that they don't represent their governments, they represent the people, and are doing whatever they can to be of service and to best exemplify what it means to be a hero. Honestly, it's even more inspiring to me than with Superman. Even though Superman, as a character, is incredibly relatable, incredibly compassionate. I love Superman now. But I think that as a mantle, and as far as bigger picture of the fact that anybody could be Captain America, I could envision several people that exist that don't even have to be American that could be Captain America because they have their own lifetimes to go off of and to best exemplify bringing the best traits of where you came from and being able to spread that to the people around you. And I think that's what Captain America means, regardless of what nationality you're from, regardless of what gender, regardless of what political beliefs you may have or personal thoughts. Captain America transcends what it means to be a hero. Now, before I go into my number 1 pick for who I think is the best mantle as a superhero in comics, regardless of which brand, I'm going to get into my honorable mentions. Some of which I have. I have Wolverine in my list as an honorable mention. There's not really much to go off of as far as like what it means to be Wolverine or how Wolverine can be reinvented and the ideals can shift and change, or that there's a rich history with Wolverine, because it's only been Wolverine and X-23 who've both held the mantle of Wolverine. Other people that I would like to put in here, I like to put in Azrael. Azrael's got a great history with the Order of Saint Dumas and Jean-Paul Valley and everyone who's held the mantle of Azrael before him, because of his 2 blades and the fact that his suit is the suit of sorrow, if I'm remembering correctly, in that it measures against your sins. So if you've not become pure of heart, the suit itself will drive you insane. And sometimes it gets even crazy enough to where it might even kill you. and cause you to commit suicide because it's driving you to that brink. And the magical capabilities with that in being in play is definitely a reason that I think Azrael is a suitable mantle. It means that you got to be pure of heart, you got to be a warrior, you got to be compassionate, respectable, and all those sort of things. So I think Azrael's a great mantle to have. Another honorable mention that I have Ms. Marvel. For those of you who don't know, Captain Marvel was originally Miss Marvel. Carol Danvers was Miss Marvel before eventually growing up and assuming through reboots or whatever, it's comics, she became Captain Marvel instead of Miss Marvel, which even Captain Marvel itself came after the Kree name Captain Marvel, which was then inherited by a guy and then later inherited again by Carol Danvers. And then Miss Marvel became Kamala Khan, as we all know from the Disney Plus show that's now getting recent light, and it goes into the more of the Muslim heritage and the Inhuman backstory. So it's got some cool depth to it, but I think as far as like what it means to be that character, it's not so much as great. There's also people like even just going off the top of my brain here, I've even got Red Hood in my honorable mentions as well. Of course, the original Red Hood was the Joker, or eventually became the Joker, and then later it was Jason Todd when he came back from the death and became this vigilante inside of Gotham who believes in killing and all that sort of thing. But I think there's no deep symbolism here. I think it's just a notable mantle all in of itself. And then for my number one, the best mantle inside of superhero comics as a whole. Was this even a question? It's obviously Robin. Robin is the quintessential mantle inside of comics, period, because it makes Batman a better person. The fact that there is such deep lore on not just the mantle, and the fact that Robin is a symbol of hope for Batman. He makes Batman's day better. He makes sure Batman doesn't cross the line. He's the light that keeps Batman in check from losing himself to the eternal darkness of when he's by himself. And I think that all of the members, the primary four Robins, are just so brilliantly crafted characters and take such deep dives into psychology, into symbolism, into so many different areas. We obviously know that it all began with Dick Grayson. And Dick Grayson's story of the fact that he relates to being an orphan just like Bruce. He lost his parents tragically like Bruce. And then we see these bonds and these developments grow and change and foster. But unlike Bruce Wayne, Dick Grayson is able to heal from his trauma. He's able to let go of any rage that he might have had in the past. And then he is able to transcend and eventually leaves Batman because he feels that now at this point, instead of the fatherly, sympathetic, understanding common ground that they had, he feels that now Batman's holding him back. He's trying to hold his emotions back, to tie him more to a mission than to people. Because Bruce is so controlled by grief to an unhealthy respect and is so toxic with Robin that sometimes even his pessimistic outlooks sometimes even rub off into Robin. Because let's face it, if you are raised by this person who is your father figure, there are going to be some qualities that are going to rub off every now and then. But Dick recognized that this wasn't healthy. This wasn't okay to be living in. So he eventually leaves and he becomes Nightwing, who is every bit better, in my opinion, as a character than Batman because Dick Grayson has let go of his trauma. He's let go. He still remembers his parents' deaths, of course. Don't get me wrong, but he's naturally healed better than Bruce ever did. And because he was able to overcome that trauma, he's probably the best hero that Bloodhaven has. He is Bruce's most trusted friend, more so than anybody else, with the only exception being Alfred, which, as of recently, Bane killed him, so there's that. But Then we go on to the opposite end of the spectrum with Jason Todd, and the fact that Jason Todd has a very opposite effect of what Dick Grayson had. After stealing the tires from the Batmobile, he gets taken in, trained to become a Robin. But unlike Dick Grayson, who had this compassion, who had this charm, who had this brilliance to him, Jason had a bit of a darker edge. Jason was always a bit more violent because he grew up in the streets. He had to be violent, he had to be tough in order to survive. It's the way that he had to grow up because he didn't have anyone there for him. And even though he is trying to grow in the way that Bruce wants, he can't really suppress this darkness that is inside of him. Much the same regard as Bruce does. Bruce struggles and still struggles with the darkness that surrounds him. But it eventually leads to tragedy. It gets so tragic to the point to where Jason loses his life. And Batman immediately regrets it. He goes on a darker, more depressing path than he's ever been before. And he's a lot more violent. He grieves. He blames himself for Jason's death because he feels that he has failed him as a teacher. Unlike with Dick Grayson, when he was able to have him transcend his own grief and to be able to heal and to resolve himself to become a better person, he got Jason killed. So it's a much darker, more tragic path. And then when you get to the Under the Red Hood storyline, it makes it to where now it's talking about morality. And now Jason doesn't blame Batman for his death, but why didn't he kill the Joker? Why didn't he get his vengeance? He's currently working on his crusade to avenge his parents, make sure it happens to nobody else. But why didn't he do that for him by taking out the Joker? So then there's this other more dilemma, and we learn why Bruce doesn't cross the lines. And it becomes this deep philosophical reasoning to where now Robin isn't just the light to Batman's shadow, but sometimes it can even be a bigger hole inside of Batman. And that brings me on to Tim Drake, who now is trying to pull Batman again out of this darkness, much in the same way that Dick did. But unlike the other two Robins, there wasn't really anything initially that Tim Drake related to Batman with. There was no orphaned common background like Dick had. There was no rage or darkness that Jason had. But Tim was brilliant. Tim is a brilliant detective who figured out Batman's identity before even meeting him and was able to prove himself as a Robin through his brilliance. He might have not been as gifted or as angry or as strong as his predecessors, but he brought Robin into the light because he felt he volunteered to be Robin, to be the light to Batman's shadow, and to be able to use his brilliant detective mind in order to do so. So now we see that there are three Robins, and they all are basically like sons to Batman. And then we get to Damian Wayne. Damian Wayne is the legitimate son of Bruce. But the biggest difference, and honestly the biggest criticism that people have about Damian, is that he's super unlikable. Well, let me try to convince you a bit about Damian. Put yourself in Damian's shoes as I explain all this, okay? So, you were raised by a group of assassins for 11 years of your life. 11 years is a lot of development of who your personality becomes, what your ideals are going to be, and especially is important around the people who you were raised by. This whole time, you're never told that you had a father, that the only closest father-like figure was your grandfather in Ra's al Ghul. Ra's al Ghul is talking about this ideals and how it's okay to kill, and how we are trying to restart the world and that sort of thing, and that you are to become the next head of the demon, because you are the best of the best of us. You are a Ghul. You are the offspring of the world's greatest detective, and probably one of the best assassins to ever exist. So you are constantly gaslighted, and your ego is going to be inflated to that. That's just a natural thing that would happen. So now you're super egotistical, because that's all you've been told all your life is that you're great, you're perfect, there's nothing wrong with you, there's no flaws, you are the perfect specimen of an assassin, and you are trained to kill because you're an assassin. And then by the time you actually do meet your father, you realize that he's not the person that you thought he was. Because you've been hearing stories about your father and always have had this curiosity of if he would be like you, but you come to find out that he's a very different person. You come to find out that he's a bit more compassionate, that he doesn't kill, that he does have an ego, but he tries to put yours in check. But now you think, there's nothing wrong with me. I kill because it's necessary. I'm the best because I've always been told I'm the best. So there's no way that you telling me that I have flaws is applicable to me. It's null and void. And the fact that they don't get along with their morality and that sort of thing is a very different relationship that Bruce has with Damian that is unlike with the other Robins. The other Robins, for the most part, were able to heal or take something from Bruce, to where Dick was able to take everything he learned from Bruce and how to overcome his trauma, became Nightwing. Jason fell to the darkness and became Red Hood. Tim used his intellect and was able to reestablish hope within Batman once again. Now with Damian now has something to give to Bruce. Damian has a different outlook, a different perspective on life, and they have to learn to work together. That's never happened before. Batman's never had to learn, really, to work with somebody that he didn't already mold. Batman molded Tim. Batman molded Jason. Batman molded Damian. I mean, molded Dick Grayson, excuse me. But he never molded Damian. Damian was already molded into the person that he was by his mother and by the League of Assassins. So how do you change someone who's grown up 11 years of his life believing that killing is okay, that he is the perfect specimen, that there is no flaws within him, when actually deep down, all of this is just insecurities that are at the surface, when in all actuality he wants the love of his father because he never got it from his mother. He never got it from his grandfather. That is a different kind of Robin relationship, and each of the different Robins are still playing something into Batman's effect. But the fact that it is all explored in this deep way, and it deeply impacts Batman with each and every single one, yet the symbol and the message of Robin still remains the same, is honestly the true beauty behind Robin as a whole. So let me know down in the comments below. Do you guys agree with my list? Do you think that these are the supreme best mantles inside of superheroes regardless of Marvel or DC? Was there any other honorable mentions that I should have mentioned? Let me know down in the comments below. But otherwise, I will see you guys in the next video.